hiker most of my life. Nothing serious, just a guy who likes to get out into the woods, breathe air that does not smell like gasoline, and maybe camp out once or twice a season. Last fall, I decided to take a weekend trip to Yellowstone National Park. I had been there before, but never deep into the more remote sections near the Lamar Valley, and something about the isolation called to me. I planned a simple route, nothing crazy, just 2 nights out, circle around some of the lesser-known trails, and be back to my truck by Sunday evening. I packed light, checked in with a ranger at the visitor center near Mammoth Hot Springs, and hit the trail early Friday afternoon. The air was crisp, but the towering lodgepole pines and wide open valleys muffled the wind in a way that made the entire place feel like a massive, breathing world of its own. The first night was uneventful. I made camp near a small offshoot of Soda Butte Creek, made some coffee on my little stove, and listened to the sounds of the forest settle in for the night. Normal noises, crickets, the occasional howl of distant wolves. I slept well. The second day, though, things felt off. I started to notice how quiet it was mid-morning. Birds had been everywhere when I packed up my tent, chirping and flashing through the trees. But by 10 or 11, it was like someone had hit the mute button on the forest. No birds, no insects, no breeze, just the sound of my boots crunching on damp pine needles and old snow patches. Around noon, I crested a ridge that overlooked a narrow valley near an old geothermal runoff area. It was there. I saw it. At first, it just looked like a dark figure standing at the edge of the tree line on the opposite slope. I thought it might be a bison at first, but it was too upright, too still. I raised my binoculars, and my stomach dropped. It was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen. Its fur was dark brown, almost black, and shaggy. It stood there, arms dangling by its sides, just watching me. I lowered the binoculars and stared across the valley. It did not move. I told myself it was a tree stump, some trick of the light, but I knew better. I had that gut feeling that whatever it was aware of me too. I forced myself to keep walking. I did not want to stay exposed on the ridge any longer than necessary. As I dropped down into the valley, the trees closed around me, and I lost sight of the figure. For a while, I thought maybe I imagined it. That night, I camped again, closer to Pebble Creek. I built a fire bigger than usual, telling myself it was just to keep warm, but deep down, I knew I wanted the light. I cooked a simple meal and tried to relax, but my nerves were shot. Every snap of a twig made me jump. Around midnight, I heard it. Heavy footsteps circling the perimeter of my camp. Slow, deliberate. It was not an elk, and it was not a bear. I have been around enough wildlife to know the difference. This was heavier, almost human, but it was not running or crashing through the underbrush like a spooked animal. It was methodical, pacing. I killed the fire until only embers glowed, then sat there in the dark, clutching my hunting knife, wishing I had brought something more serious. At one point, I swear I saw a massive shadow move between the trees about 30 feet from where I sat. It was too dark to make out details, but I could feel its presence. The air was thick, almost like a thunderstorm about to break. The footsteps eventually faded, but I did not sleep. I sat there, eyes wide, listening to the night until the sky began to lighten with the coming dawn. At first light, I packed up camp at record speed. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out of there. The hike back to the trailhead felt endless. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure standing in the trees, watching me. I never saw it again, but I could feel it, lingering just out of sight. When I finally reached my truck at the parking area near Lamar River Trail, I just sat behind the wheel for a long time, trying to shake the feeling that something had followed me all the way out. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? That Bigfoot watched me in the woods. People would laugh me out of the room. But I know what I saw. It was not a bear, not a man, not anything I had ever seen before. Sometimes, when I lay in bed at night, I can still hear those slow, heavy steps moving through the leaves, circling just beyond the reach of the firelight. I never really bought into the Bigfoot stories, not because I thought I was smarter than everyone else, just because I figured if something like that existed, somebody would have shot it or trapped it by now. That changed 2 years ago, during an elk hunt deep in the northern part of Yellowstone, near Hell-Roaring Creek. It was late October, right after an early snowstorm had dusted the higher elevations. Cold enough to keep the crowds away, but not so bad that the backcountry was completely locked down. I had a backcountry permit and planned a solo trip. I had done it a dozen times before. Honestly, I loved being alone out there. No noise, no people, just me in the woods. The first day went fine. I saw a few elk tracks, a fresh bed, nothing out of the ordinary. I camped near the creek, cooked some venison jerky I had packed, and turned in early. It all started the second night. I had made camp in a clearing not far from the river, thinking the open space would help me spot any animals that came close. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of something moving, something heavy. At first, I thought it was a grizzly. I sat up in my tent, heart pounding, hand already reaching for my rifle. The footsteps circled the tent once, slow and deliberate, crunching through the thin snow crust and dead leaves. It was close, too close. I waited, barely breathing, until the footsteps faded into the woods. That should have been enough to scare me into hiking out the next morning, but I told myself it was a bear passing through, nothing more. I was wrong. The next day was strange. I kept catching whiffs of a foul, wet dog kind of smell, strong enough to make me gag. At first, I thought maybe it was a dead elk somewhere nearby, but I never found a carcass. The woods felt wrong too. No birds, no squirrels, just this oppressive silence. It was late afternoon when I saw it. I was hiking a ridgeline, trying to cut back toward camp before nightfall, when I saw movement below. Something was moving fast through the trees, parallel to me, keeping pace. It was huge, bigger than any bear I had ever seen, and it moved with an unnatural speed, covering ground in long, loping strides. I froze, staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It broke from the trees for just a second, enough for me to get a clear look. It was covered in dark, matted hair, and it ran on 2 legs. Not clumsy or awkward, like a man in a costume. This thing was powerful, muscles moving under the hair, long arms swinging low. It was no bear, no man. It was hunting me. I knew it, deep down in the animal part of my brain. It was not just following. It was tracking, closing in. I turned and ran, crashing through the woods like a madman. I knew better than to run in the wilderness. Every survival instinct I had screamed against it. But I had never felt terror like that before. I could hear it too behind me, smashing through the trees, breathing heavy, this guttural growling sound rising from the woods. It was fast, faster than anything should have been. Branches whipped against my face and arms. I lost my footing twice, went down hard once, and ripped the knee of my pants open, but I got back up and kept going. Somewhere in that chaos, I realized I could not make it back to camp. It was too far. If I kept running, I was going to get caught out in the open. So I did the only thing I could think of. I climbed. There was a thick, gnarled pine not far off the trail. I scrambled up it, tearing my palms on the bark, and got maybe 15 feet up before I dared to look down. The forest floor below was empty. The thing was gone. At least, for the moment. I stayed there for what felt like hours, clinging to the freezing branches, shaking from adrenaline and cold. Every now and then, I would hear something moving through the brush below, heavy steps, sniffing sounds. It was looking for me. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the first light of dawn was creeping over the hills. The forest was still eerily quiet, but that crushing feeling of being watched had lessened. I climbed down, muscles stiff and aching, and booked it straight back to camp. My gear was trashed. My tent had been slashed open, ripped in places like something with claws had torn through it. My backpack had been tossed 30 feet into the brush. There were massive footprints in the soft earth all around my camp. Bigger than any boot size, wider too, and deeper, like whatever made them weighed several hundred pounds at least. I did not bother packing. I just grabbed what I could carry and hiked straight back to the trailhead. I never reported it. Who would believe me? They would say it was a bear, a prank, a hallucination. But I know what I saw. I know what chased me. Something ancient still stalks the deep woods of Yellowstone. Something that does not want you there. I work seasonally at Yellowstone, mostly doing maintenance on some of the less traveled trails out near the Beckler region, what the locals call the Cascade Corner. It's remote, wet, and wild, and it stays that way because the tourists mostly stick to the geysers and the big attractions, which is fine by me. Less people meant less mess to clean up. I had been doing it for about 3 seasons when this happened, and to this day, it is the only time I have seriously thought about quitting. It started on a weird note. That week, there had been a series of small quakes around the southwest part of the park. Not uncommon. Yellowstone is basically a giant volcanic system, always rumbling one way or another, but there were murmurs among the older hands about animals acting strange. Herds of elk abandoning valleys they normally grazed in, birds flying off in huge flocks toward the north. You hear things like that enough times, and you start paying attention. I was assigned to do a basic trail survey near Union Falls, a gorgeous area that requires a long hike through forests, rivers, and marshy ground. The plan was to overnight at a backcountry site, take notes on trail conditions, and check a few old bridge crossings. I set out in the early morning, crossing Beckler Meadows under a silver sky. It was quiet, no bird song, no bug buzz, just the soft splash of my boots through wet grass. By late afternoon, I made camp near a stand of burned-out pines. Fire had come through years ago, but the dead trees still stood like blackened sentinels. It should have felt lonely, peaceful even, but there was an edge in the air that made my skin crawl. Around sunset, as I was cooking some freeze-dried stew, I noticed a strange cloud forming over the ridge to the south. It was not moving like a normal cloud. It stayed in one place, almost pulsing, and it had an odd glow to it, faint but unmistakable. At first, I chalked it up to the setting sun, weird reflections, maybe some geothermal vent kicking up mist. Yellowstone can play tricks on your eyes if you let it. But the glow got stronger. I watched as it slowly descended, not falling like mist or smoke, but sinking in a controlled way. I grabbed my binoculars and focused in. That was when I realized it was not a cloud at all. It was a craft. A massive, circular object, partially shrouded in its own mist, with faint blue and green lights rotating slowly around its edge. It made no sound, none. It hovered over the valley for a few seconds, then began to drift my direction. I dropped the binoculars and backed toward the tent without even thinking. My instincts screamed at me to hide, to get out of the open. The sky above me lit up with a soft, rippling light, almost like the northern lights, but the colors were wrong, too metallic, too unnatural. I ducked into my tent, zipped it up, and killed my lantern. The glow outside intensified. I could see the shape of the craft through the thin nylon walls, massive and slow, passing overhead like a hunting shark. I held my breath, terrified it would stop, that it would somehow know I was there. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then there was a deep, low hum, so low I felt it more in my bones than in my ears. The The ground beneath me vibrated slightly, like a distant engine was idling under the earth. Suddenly, a sharp beam of light snapped on, cutting through the trees to the north of my camp. It was not a regular beam, not like a flashlight or a helicopter searchlight. It was almost solid, a perfect cylinder of bluish-white light that seemed to ripple at the edges. I watched, frozen, as the beam swept slowly across the clearing, touching the ground, then moving up the burned trees. When the light hit a tree trunk, the bark seemed to shimmer and warp, like it was heating up or shifting at a molecular level. I pulled my pack close, fumbling blindly for my radio. I managed to turn it on, whispering into it. "This is Maintenance Team 4. Is anyone on Channel 3? Over." Nothing but static. I tried again, voice shaking. "Maintenance 4, requesting immediate contact. Something is over my position." The static popped and crackled. No voice came back. I do not know what made me do it. Maybe some stupid idea about getting proof, but I slowly unzipped the tent door an inch and peered out. The clearing was bathed in that awful rippling light. And there, not 50 yards away, standing directly under the beam, was a bull elk. It was frozen, completely still, eyes wide and glassy. Its body shimmered and twitched in ways that made my stomach turn. I watched, horrified, as the elk's legs buckled and it collapsed sideways without a sound. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the beam shut off. The elk lay there, unmoving. The craft, still silent, began to ascend, moving straight upward at a slow, steady pace. The colors around its rim flickered faster, like a sped-up heartbeat, before it shot into the sky with impossible speed and vanished into the stars. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat there, heart hammering, staring at the fallen elk. I must have sat like that for an hour before I finally worked up the courage to move. When I approached the elk, I saw something that has haunted me ever since. Its body was completely intact. No blood, no broken bones, no visible injuries. But its eyes were wrong. They were cloudy, almost burned looking, and its fur, where the beam had touched, looked singed, curled, and brittle, like dead grass after a brush fire. I knew then that no one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. I packed up my camp as fast as I could and hiked through the night back to the trailhead, using my headlamp and praying whatever I'd seen was gone for good. When I got back to the ranger station, I reported finding a dead elk near Union Falls. I left out everything else. They sent out a small team to investigate, but by the time they got there, the elk carcass had disappeared. Gone without a trace. No blood trail, no drag marks, just gone. Some of the rangers joked about scavengers, maybe a bear dragging it off, but the look some of the older guys gave me told a different story. They had heard things too, maybe not the same as me, but close enough. A few nights later, I woke up in my bunk to see a faint glow moving along the ridge behind the station. It was too small to be the same craft, maybe something smaller. A scout, part of me thought. But I stayed in bed paralyzed until it vanished. I do not go into the Bachelor region alone anymore. If I have to work that area, I make damn sure I am with someone else. And I do not camp out there either. Not anymore. Yellowstone is a wild place, older and stranger than most people realize. The ground moves, the air hums, and sometimes, just sometimes, things come out of the sky that do not belong to this world. And if you ever find yourself alone out there, under a glowing mist that should not exist, do not look up. Because whatever is flying over Yellowstone is not just seeing. It's looking for something. Maybe it is looking for you. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more horror content. If you have any real cryptid encounters, or you're a horror writer wanting to share your stories, please feel free to email me in the description anytime.